Tonight, perhaps your mind feels heavy, as though the hours have gathered too much noise. Thoughts keep circling the same quiet ache. And even in rest, you do not rest. The day has been long, and yet your heart still waits for something unnamed. This space, here and now, is where you can finally breathe. You are not asked to change or to fight. You are simply invited to listen, to let your soul settle into stillness. In this gentle night, we will walk together through the tender shifts of the heart, where God moves quietly within your story. Imagine a room dimly lit, a soft light touching the edge of your window. Outside, the wind hums through leaves, calm and low. This is the hour when nothing rushes, when even time kneels to silence. Tonight, we will rest beside C.S.
Lewis, who once wrote, "Isn't it funny how day by day nothing changes, but when you look back, everything is different?" Perhaps your life is quietly changing too. Let us listen for the moments when God gently turns our path toward light. Something unseen is already unfolding.
The night begins as it always does, soft, familiar, cloaked in silence. Yet tonight, something feels different. Beneath the calm, a quiet unease begins to move, like ripples under still water. It does not roar or demand your attention. It hums gently in the depths of your being. You cannot explain it, but you feel it, the weight of restlessness pressing gently against your heart. The room is still, but within you, a tide is shifting. Perhaps you lie awake, your thoughts circling like slow-turning clouds. Everything in your outer world appears fine. The job remains steady, the relationship stable, the rhythm of your days seemingly unchanged. Yet your soul whispers that something has ended, though nothing visible has closed. This is the strange beginning of transition, the divine movement that begins not with action, but with ache. God often begins his most delicate work this way, not by sending thunder, but by unsettling what once felt safe. The unease you feel is not the loss of peace, it is the birth of a deeper one. He stirs the heart so that it will no longer find comfort in shallow places. The chair that once felt soft now feels too small. The life that once felt whole now hums with quiet incompleteness. You begin to wonder what changed, yet nothing around you did. What has changed is the hidden language of your spirit. It now speaks to a higher call. C.S.LEWIS once wrote in Mere Christianity, "If we find ourselves with the desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world." That sentence rests gently in the soul like a key in the lock of longing. The restlessness you feel may not be confusion at all. It may be the first sound of God calling you homeward, not to a place, but to a deeper way of being. At first, you may resist. You may try to soothe the unease with routine. A little more work, another conversation, another attempt to fill the silence. Yet nothing quite quiets it. What once comforted you now feels thin, like old light fading at dawn. There is no fault in this. It is simply the sign that your soul is ready to grow. Growth, in its truest sense, often begins with disquiet. The still pool must ripple before it learns to flow again. This restlessness is not punishment. It is invitation. God is gently loosening the knots that held you in a smaller life. He knows that peace built on familiarity can become a quiet prison. And so, in mercy, he disturbs the comfortable to awaken what is holy within. The feeling of no longer fitting is not rejection, it is redirection. The one who formed you knows when your old walls have grown too narrow for your spirit's unfolding. You might remember the words from The Problem of Pain, where Lewis wrote, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." If pain is his shout, then restlessness is his whisper. It is gentler, but no less divine. It calls you to lift your eyes, to imagine that life could hold something larger, something more tender, something truer than comfort. When everything familiar begins to feel foreign, it may be because heaven has already begun its quiet rearranging. The Spirit is preparing space within you for a new way of seeing, for a new tenderness of trust. Sometimes he turns the soil before planting the seed. Sometimes he takes away the light so that you can learn to see by faith instead of sight. In those moments when the night feels longer than usual, breathe. The restlessness you feel is not a mistake. It is the murmur of dawn preparing to rise. You are not being abandoned. You are being beckoned. God is near, nearer than the pulse beneath your skin, and he is reshaping your longing into direction. So when you feel the gentle pull in your chest, do not rush to silence it. Sit with it. Let it speak softly. Let it remind you that stillness and change can coexist, that you can be at rest even while being remade. The discomfort is not the enemy of peace. It is its threshold. Every soul that has ever grown has first learned to listen in the tension between contentment and calling. Somewhere beyond your knowing, light is gathering. It has not yet broken the horizon, but it is moving toward you, slowly, silently, faithfully. And when it finally arrives, you will understand what this night was for. You will see that the restlessness was never meant to wound you, but to wake you. For the dawn that God prepares always begins this way. In the quiet tremble before morning, when the heart learns to hear him whisper, "It is time." There comes a time when what once opened easily begins to close. Paths that used to flow without resistance now seem to tighten. People who once understood you drift away. Opportunities that once appeared certain suddenly fade. It can feel like loss, like the world shrinking around you. But beneath the surface, something far deeper is unfolding, a mercy that hides within the closing of doors.
For every ending in God's rhythm is not destruction, but redirection. When his hand closes one door, it is often to lead you into air you have not yet breathed.
You may find yourself asking, why now? Why this? You were faithful, careful, prayerful, yet the very things you relied upon seem to crumble. In those moments, it is easy to think you've been forgotten. But what if the closing is not abandonment, but care? What if the stillness is not silence, but space? Space for God to move where you cannot. Sometimes he must remove what sustains us so we can learn to rest in him instead of our certainty. When the provision fades, it is not always because you did something wrong. It may be because you have stayed too long in a season meant only to carry you part way. The children of Israel once walked under the cloud of God's provision in the wilderness. When the manna ceased, it was not because God had withdrawn his love. It was because the promised land was near. The end of manna was the beginning of harvest. The silence you feel now might be the moment before the new song begins. Closed doors are sacred thresholds. They are where the divine pauses us, not to punish, but to prepare. You may knock and knock, trying to force your way back into the room that once held you, only to find it sealed. That is not cruelty, it is kindness. For if you could re-enter what is ending, you would never discover what is waiting. C.S.LEWIS once wrote, "Getting over a painful experience is much like crossing monkey bars. You have to let go at some point in order to move forward. Letting go is not easy. It asks you to trust what you cannot yet see. It asks you to believe that the one who closed the door still holds the key. When every way seems blocked, he is quietly building another path, one that leads not to what you lost, but to what will finally make you whole." Often, we think of God's work as always opening, new chances, new blessings, new beginnings. But divine work is also about holy endings. The gardener prunes the branch not because he despises the flower, but because he knows it can bloom no further until it is cut back. In the same way, God prunes your life not to reduce you, but to restore your breath. He knows the weight you carry, the burdens you've grown used to. Sometimes he must take away what you cling to so your hands may finally open for what is next. Do not fear the pause. The silence between chapters is not the absence of story. It is the sacred breath before the words begin again. When things stop working, when prayers seem unanswered, when doors that once swung open now stay still, breathe. God is not gone. He is nearer than ever, rearranging what you cannot yet name. Remember the words of Ecclesiastes 3:1. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. Even the closing of doors has its time.
The purpose of endings is not to leave you empty, but to lead you into readiness. God never closes one chapter without already holding the next in his hands. When your plans dissolve, when you find yourself standing before walls that will not yield, know this: there is air beyond them. You were not meant to suffocate in what has already served its purpose. The door closes so that you may breathe again, deeply, slowly, freely. This is the rhythm of grace: contraction before expansion, stillness before movement, ending before beginning. So if tonight you find yourself at a door that no longer opens, do not press your ear against it hoping to hear what once was. Step back. Look at the space around you. There, in the quiet, God is making room for something new to be born. Trust that the hand that closes is the same hand that will soon lead you forward. You are not forgotten. You are being moved, gently, purposefully, lovingly, toward air you have never breathed before. And when the morning comes, you will look back and understand that even the closing was an act of mercy. For in God's world, every closed door is not the end of the story. It is the quiet beginning of your next chapter of light. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when the world begins to look different, not because it has changed, but because you have. The colors soften, the noise quiets. What once held your attention no longer calls to you. The old desires lose their edge, and a new tenderness begins to form within. You start to see through the surface of things, through success, comfort, fear, and even loss. The change does not happen quickly. It comes slowly, like dawn breaking through fog. You begin to see, not with your eyes, but with your soul. This is how God reshapes us for the next season. Before he alters the path, he transforms the one who walks upon it. Before he gives new direction, he teaches new sight. Sometimes he shifts your perspective by loosening the ties that once defined you. A friendship, a job, a dream you held too tightly. It may feel like breaking, but it is really opening. For nothing new can grow in a heart still clinging to what was. When God desires to lift you higher, he often changes the lens through which you see everything. At first, you may resist. The familiar world, though small, feels safe. You might try to carry old ways of thinking into new spaces. Yet the more you hold to them, the heavier they become. They no longer fit the shape of your becoming. There comes a quiet realization that if you wish to move forward, you must be willing to see differently. What once felt like loss now begins to look like release. What once seemed like delay now appears as preparation. C.S.LEWIS once wrote, "It may be hard for an egg to turn into a bird. It would be a jolly sight harder for it to learn to fly while remaining an egg." We are like eggs at present. You cannot go on indefinitely being just an ordinary, decent egg. We must be hatched or go bad. Mere Christianity. The shell cracks not because something went wrong, but because life within has begun to press outward. The breaking is sacred. It is the sound of growth. When your perspective begins to change, it can be disorienting. You may look at the people around you and realize that some no longer understand the language of your heart. The conversations that once gave you joy now feel shallow. The places that once gave you comfort now feel dim. This too is holy. God is preparing you to see with gentler eyes, eyes that recognize grace in imperfection, eyes that look for his fingerprints in small, unassuming places. Sometimes he reveals this new way of seeing through silence. You pray and receive no answer, yet the quiet itself begins to teach you. You start to understand that not every prayer must be spoken aloud. Some prayers are lived through patience, through waiting, through surrender. The world begins to shimmer with hidden meanings. Even the smallest things, a stranger's smile, a breeze through an open window, the flicker of a candle at night, begin to feel like language, like whispers from God reminding you that he is near. When your sight changes, so does your heart. You start to love more quietly, to hope more gently, to hold less tightly. You learn that understanding is not always knowing, but trusting. The mind no longer needs every answer. The heart begins to rest in mystery. What once felt like uncertainty becomes wonder.
Perhaps that is why C.S.LEWIS also wrote, "I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else, the weight of glory." When God grants you a new way of seeing, it is not so you can escape the world, but so you can live more fully within it, with eyes that find His light even in the ordinary.
So if you find your vision changing, if the world feels both unfamiliar and beautifully new, know that this is not confusion, but calling. God is not taking away your sight. He is deepening it. You are learning to see as He sees, not through fear, but through love, not through loss, but through becoming.
Let this transformation unfold slowly. You do not need to rush the seeing. The soul learns in its own time. Like a seed waiting for rain, your understanding will bloom when the light is right. For now, stay open. Watch quietly. Trust that the eyes God is shaping within you will one day see beauty even in what once felt broken.
And when that moment comes, when you realize the view has changed, when you sense a peace that no circumstance can explain, you will know that you have begun to see not only with sight, but with spirit. Then, even the smallest things will feel like miracles. Even the simplest breath will feel like grace, and you will whisper into the stillness, "Now I see." There are moments in life when help does not come from the places you expect. It does not come from the familiar voices or the steady hands you once relied upon. Instead, it arrives quietly, through strangers, through brief encounters, through gentle words that seem to find you when you need them most. These are not coincidences. They are divine appointments, soft arrivals sent by God to remind you that you do not walk alone.
When God begins to shift your life, He rarely allows you to travel that path without companions. Each season carries its own circle of souls, some who guide, some who comfort, some who simply walk beside you in silence. They do not all stay, but each one leaves something sacred behind. Sometimes it is courage, sometimes it is clarity, sometimes it is the simple reminder that you are seen. You may not recognize them at first. They enter your story so quietly that you might overlook their presence. A conversation that lingers in your mind, a kindness offered without reason, a word spoken at the exact moment your faith begins to tremble. These are God's messengers wrapped in ordinary form. They are the Barnabases of your journey, those who, like the friend of Paul, appear not to shine for themselves, but to help your own light find its way forward. In the book of Proverbs, it is written, "In the Lord's hand the king's heart is a stream of water that He channels toward all who please Him." Proverbs 21:1. This verse whispers a quiet truth. God can turn any heart, any circumstance, any stranger toward you when it serves His purpose. The people who enter your life in this season are not there by accident. They are part of the divine current that carries you toward your becoming. C.S.LEWIS once reflected, "Friendship is born at that moment when one person says to another, 'What? You too? I thought I was the only one.'" The Four Loves. That moment of recognition, when two souls meet and realize their journeys echo one another, is not small. It is holy. It is how God reminds us that we are threads in the same divine tapestry, woven together not by chance, but by intention. You may also notice that some people begin to drift away. Relationships once central may quietly fade. This too is part of the holy rearrangement. When new voices enter, old echoes must sometimes fall silent. Do not mourn every departure. The soul knows when it has learned what it was meant to learn from another. The closing of one connection often makes room for one that breathes more life into your spirit. At times, you might meet someone whose presence feels inexplicably familiar, as though you have known them far longer than you have. They might stay for a season, a conversation, or even just a moment, yet their impact feels larger than time. This is the quiet signature of divine connection, the kind that leaves peace behind it. You feel lighter after they speak, steadier after they leave. That is how you know they were sent. Not every helper comes with words. Some will help you simply by listening. Some will offer a prayer you never asked for.
Others will show you through their gentleness what grace looks like when lived. You may never know how their lives intertwine with yours in God's design. But one day, when you look back, you will trace a pattern, faces, names, encounters, and see how each was a step toward healing, each a lamp along your road. God's way of sending people is often subtle. He does not announce their arrival with fanfare. Instead, he places them quietly along your path, like candles left to light the way in darkness. It is up to you to notice, to receive, to give thanks. When you begin to recognize these soft arrivals, you start to see that love is not rare. It is constant, waiting to be seen. Every act of kindness becomes a thread of divine intention. Every gesture of care becomes a whisper from heaven saying, "You are not forgotten." So tonight, think of those who have entered your story gently. The friend who called when you needed to hear a kind voice. The stranger who smiled when you felt unseen. The mentor whose wisdom steadied your heart. None of them appeared by chance. They were sent as quiet proof that God still weaves his care into the small details of your days. When you next meet someone who makes your heart feel lighter, who helps you remember the beauty of being understood, pause and give thanks. You may not realize it yet, but God may have just placed another lantern along your path. And as you walk onward, through nights of silence and mornings of light, remember that divine help rarely enters with noise. It arrives softly through the hands and hearts of those he sends, reminding you that in this long journey of becoming, you are never truly alone. There are nights when the world feels unbearably wide. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows move across the room. Your mind tries to make sense of what is happening. The closed doors, the waiting, the quiet that feels too long. Questions turn over and over like restless tides. What if I've lost my way? What if God has gone silent? But slowly, beneath all that noise, another sound begins to rise. It is not loud nor immediate, but soft, like the hum of wind through leaves or the hush of distant rain. It is peace. Not peace as the world defines it, the kind that depends on circumstances or resolution, but a deeper, quieter peace that comes only from being held, even when nothing makes sense. When God is transforming your life, he often teaches you through unknowing. He lets you walk through places where clarity is hidden, where the map fades and your only guide is faith. You may beg for answers, for signs, for direction, but instead of explanations, he offers presence. Instead of instructions, he offers stillness. And over time, you begin to realize that what you needed was never the plan. It was the peace to trust without one. The Apostle Paul once described this in words that still echo through every anxious heart. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Philippians 4, verse 7. This kind of peace is unlike anything else. It does not arrive because your life has become easier. It arrives because your heart has learned to rest in the unseen. It guards you like a gentle wall around your thoughts, keeping despair from entering, keeping hope alive. There is something holy about that kind of calm. It comes in moments when logic fails, when by all accounts you should be falling apart, yet somehow you are not. You may still cry, still ache, still wonder, but there is a quiet knowing underneath it all, a sense that you are being carried through what you cannot carry yourself. That is the fingerprint of God. He may not still every storm, but he will steady your heart in the middle of it. C.S.LEWIS once wrote, "God cannot give us a happiness and peace apart from himself, because it is not there. There is no such thing, mere Christianity." Peace is not something he gives as a separate gift. It is who he is. When he draws near, peace follows like the tide after the moon. The closer you come to him, the more you realize that the stillness you long for was never meant to be found in circumstances, but in his presence. You begin to see it, that peace is not the same as ease. It is not about having control or answers. It is the slow unbinding of the heart from the need to understand. It is the gentle surrender that allows you to breathe even when the way ahead is veiled. You stop asking, "Why this? Why now?" and instead begin to whisper, "Even now, you are here. The peace of God does not erase questions. It simply makes them less loud. It does not remove the waiting. It teaches you how to wait well. It steadies your breathing, softens your gaze, and lets you see that the dark is not empty. It is simply the space where faith learns to glow. There will come moments when you catch yourself wondering why you are not as afraid as you once were. The same situation, the same uncertainty, and yet your heart feels lighter. That is how peace reveals itself, not with trumpet sound, but as a quiet absence of fear. You realize that the silence that once terrified you now comforts you. The not knowing that once felt unbearable now feels strangely sacred. Sometimes God must strip away understanding so that you might know Him differently. He teaches peace through absence. Absence of answers, absence of control, absence of certainty. But in that emptiness, you discover fullness. You learn that His nearness can be felt most clearly when everything else falls quiet. To find peace in the midst of unknowing is to stand still while the world spins, trusting that the one who set the stars in motion has not forgotten you. You may not see the whole path, but you see enough light for the next step, and that is all faith ever truly needs. There is a beauty in this kind of surrender. It is not passive. It is not weakness. It is the quiet strength of trust, the strength that says, even if I do not know what tomorrow brings, I know who holds tomorrow. It is the courage to stop striving, to unclench your fists, to let your heart rest in the rhythm of divine timing. Sometimes peace will come like a soft weight upon your chest, heavy but kind, reminding you to breathe slower. Sometimes it will come like a quiet voice within saying, you can stop running now. And sometimes it will simply come as the gentle realization that, though everything around you is uncertain, you are no longer afraid. When this happens, do not rush past it. Sit with it. Let it wrap around you like a warm blanket in the cold of confusion. This is the peace that surpasses understanding, not because it is hidden, but because it is holy. It cannot be explained. It can only be felt. It is the language of heaven spoken quietly into the human heart. So tonight, if you find yourself surrounded by questions and shadows, do not fear. The silence you hear is not abandonment. It is invitation. It is God's way of saying, be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Rest in that knowing. Let it carry you through the unknown. For even in the dark, you are being guided. And as you surrender to that gentle assurance, you will discover that peace was never the absence of trouble. It was the presence of love all along. And somewhere, beneath the weight of all you do not yet understand, you will hear His whisper, clear and steady, like light across water. You are safe. You are seen. You are hailed. Sometimes the path to new life does not begin with what you planned, but with what surprises you. You may have prayed for one kind of change, one clear direction, one open door that seemed to fit the shape of your dream. Yet when the door finally opens, it is not the one you imagined. It leads somewhere quieter, smaller, or stranger than you hoped. At first, it feels wrong. But later, when you look back, you see that it was not wrong at all. It was grace in disguise. God rarely works in straight lines. He moves in patterns we cannot trace until we have walked through them. The opportunities He brings often come wrapped in uncertainty. They may look too humble, too unfamiliar, too far from what you thought you wanted. But they arrive exactly when your soul is ready for them. These are the doors you did not expect. The ones that open when all others stay shut. The ones that lead to growth you could not have planned for yourself. You may remember praying, Lord, show me my purpose. And then, instead of a grand revelation, came a small task, a quiet responsibility, a gentle pull to serve, to listen, to begin again. That is how God often answers such prayers, not with spectacle, but with simplicity. He plants the seed of purpose in small soil. Esther did not expect to be queen. Her story began with exile and loss, with being chosen for reasons she could not understand. Yet when the time came, she realized that her unexpected position was the very place through which God would save her people. The door she never asked for became the fulfillment of a promise larger than her imagination. Sometimes, the new opportunities that appear in your life will not feel like opportunities at all. They might look like detours, like delays, like disappointments. But if you listen closely, you will hear something beneath the confusion, a quiet rhythm of divine intention. You will sense that what looks like coincidence is actually orchestration. C.S.LEWIS once wrote, "There are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind." Letters to an American Lady. To step through the doors God opens, you must be willing to release what you expected. The mind will always cling to the known, but the soul understands that faith is a journey of letting go. The doors you did not expect are often the ones that lead to the very peace you have been seeking. God's invitations are subtle. He does not force your hand. He waits for your trust. He opens paths that do not shout for attention, but whisper gently, "This way." At first, these paths may seem narrow, but they widen as you walk them. Every step becomes clearer once you choose to move. That is the mystery of obedience. Clarity comes after motion, not before it. Sometimes, the opportunity God gives will ask you to risk comfort for purpose. It may require leaving behind what feels stable. You may be called to start something new, to speak when you would rather stay silent, to follow a gentle tug that makes no sense to others. The choice will not be easy. Faith rarely is. But each act of trust opens the door wider. Perhaps you have been waiting for a great sign, a thunderclap, a certainty, a map. Yet God's guidance often comes in smaller ways. A persistent idea that will not leave, a conversation that stirs your heart, a peace that follows one decision but not another. These are His fingerprints, His quiet signals along the road. He does not always explain. He invites. When new doors appear, do not rush to judge them by their appearance. Some may look too small for your vision. Others may seem too demanding. But God measures differently. He does not see as we see. What looks like limitation may actually be protection. What feels like detour may be divine alignment. He knows which doors will lead you into healing, which into purpose, which into rest. In this season of transition, learn to listen for the gentle knocking of opportunity. It may come as a thought that feels like light. It may come as an ending that turns quietly into a beginning. It may come as a person whose presence opens something in you that had long been closed. These are the sacred thresholds through which grace enters. Do not be afraid to step forward. You do not need to see the entire path. You only need to trust the one who made it. The door that opens before you is not there to test you. It is there to bless you. Walk through it with humility and let your steps echo softly in the corridors of faith. Remember that God does not recycle old seasons. He creates new ones, perfectly timed for who you are becoming. The door you did not expect may be the one that reveals your truest self. Not the self that strives to control, but the one that rests in trust. So when you find yourself standing before an unexpected opening, do not hesitate too long. Lay down your fear, breathe deeply, and whisper, "If this is you, Lord, I will walk through." And as you take that step, you may feel the air shift, a sense of rightness, a peace that does not come from understanding, but from surrender. For in every unexpected door, there is a hidden invitation to trust more deeply, to love more freely, to live more fully in the quiet rhythm of His will. And as you move forward, you will see that what felt like chance was never chance at all. It was grace, waiting patiently for your yes. There are seasons in life when the losses seem too heavy to carry. You look back and see dreams that never grew, relationships that faded, years that feel wasted. Sometimes the ache of what you've lost lingers like an old song that never truly ends. You try to move forward, but a part of you remains with what is gone. It is in these quiet, hollow moments that God begins His most tender work, the work of restoration. Not replacement, not repetition, but restoration, the gentle return of peace to what was once broken. Restoration does not mean everything comes back exactly as it was. It means that everything returns in the form it was always meant to have. What was taken from you, what slipped away, what time seemed to erase, all of it still lives in the hands of God. He gathers every fragment, every memory, every sorrow, and in his own time, he weaves it into something whole again. In the book of Joel, God makes a promise that still hums like light through the centuries. I will restore to you the years that the locusts have eaten. Joel 2:25. It is one of the most tender sentences in all of Scripture, a reminder that even what feels wasted is not beyond redemption. Time itself, which seems irreversible, becomes a servant to his mercy. Nothing in your life, not even the broken years, is ever truly lost in his sight.
There are wounds that do not heal through effort, but through surrender. Sometimes God waits until you have stopped grasping at the past, until you finally loosen your hold on what used to be. It is only then that he begins to restore, quietly, gently, not as compensation, but as transformation. The gift may not look like what you lost. It may not come from the same place or person, but it will come with the same joy and even greater peace.
C.S.LEWIS once wrote in The Great Divorce, "Has this world been so kind to you that you should leave it with regret? There are better things ahead than any we leave behind." There is wisdom in those words, not the cold comfort of forgetting, but the soft promise that God never lets goodness end in ruin. The pain you carry now may one day become the soil from which joy grows again. Sometimes restoration begins quietly, without your notice. A heaviness lifts one morning, and you realize that the grief you thought would never fade has softened. A memory that once hurt to touch now brings only gratitude. A door that once closed now opens in a new direction. That is what divine restoration looks like. Not sudden, not loud, but steady and true, like sunlight returning after rain.
You might be tempted to measure God's goodness by how much he gives back, but restoration is not about quantity, it is about quality, the peace that comes when your heart no longer resists what was meant to change. He restores not just what you had, but who you are. The same hands that once allowed your world to shift are now shaping you into someone capable of holding new blessings without fear.
Think of Job, who lost everything, family, wealth, health, and yet found that in the end, his life was made fuller than before. The story of Job is not just about loss and return. It is about faith that survived the silence between. The same God who allowed the storm was already preparing the calm. The restoration did not erase the pain, but it redeemed it. Perhaps you have moments when you look back and whisper, "It will never be the same." And you're right, it will not. But that is not a tragedy. It is a truth woven with mercy. The new will not erase the old. It will fulfill it. God never restores life to what it was. He restores it to what it was always meant to be. Restoration does not mean you forget the pain. It means the pain loses its power to define you. The tears you shed are not wasted. They water the ground of future joy. Every loss carries within it a seed of renewal. Every ending conceals a beginning. The same hand that took something from your grasp is now preparing to place something gentler there. C.S.LEWIS once said in A Grief Observed, "The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal." There is no healing without memory, no restoration without remembrance. God does not ask you to forget. He asks you to trust that even your memories are being redeemed. Sometimes the first sign of restoration is laughter returning after long silence. Sometimes it is the ability to breathe deeply again. Sometimes it is the courage to hope. These are sacred signs, evidence that your soul is beginning to remember joy.
And so, when you think of what was lost, the dream, the season, the love, the time, do not despair. Nothing good in your life is ever wasted in the sight of God. Every heartbreak becomes holy in his hands. Every ending finds its echo in renewal. Restoration rarely looks like what we expect. It is quieter, slower, more mysterious, but it comes, always. And when it does, you will understand that nothing was truly lost. It was simply being remade. So tonight, as you rest beneath the hush of heaven, remember this.
What you have lost has not vanished into nothing. It has returned to the place where all things are kept safe, the heart of God. And from there, in His time, it will rise again. Changed, yes, but still yours, still beautiful, still whole. Faith does not always arrive with fire. More often, it comes like breath, quiet, invisible, yet steady enough to keep you alive. It does not roar through the heart like a storm. It whispers, trust again. Faith is not born in certainty. It is shaped in the dimness, where your steps echo softly and you cannot see far ahead. There, in that shadowed place, faith learns to breathe, not as a rule or a doctrine, but as the rhythm of being held when nothing else can hold you. When everything in your life begins to shift, when what you once depended on fades and new ground feels uncertain, faith becomes less about believing that everything will turn out as you hoped, and more about knowing that God will remain even if it does not. The promise of faith is not that storms will end quickly, but that you will never face them alone. Look at Joseph, a boy with a dream too large for his family to understand. His life unraveled in ways that must have felt like betrayal. Sold, enslaved, forgotten. Yet through each loss, faith kept breathing in him, small but alive. It grew in prison cells, in silence, in waiting. By the time his dream finally came to pass, Joseph's faith had become something deeper than ambition. It had become trust. The darkness had taught him that God's delays are not denials, they are refinements. Faith matures in the spaces where answers do not come quickly. When you pray and the heavens seem still, when you move forward and nothing changes, when you do not feel the closeness you once felt, those are not signs that your faith is dying. They are moments when faith is learning to live without sight. C.S.LEWIS once wrote, "You never know how much you really believe anything until its truth or falsehood becomes a matter of life and death to you." A grief observed. In other words, faith is proven in the places where it could have broken and didn't. There will be nights when you whisper prayers that seem to vanish into silence. You may wait for a response that never comes in the form you expect. But slowly, without realizing it, you begin to change. You start to find peace in the stillness itself. You begin to believe that even when you cannot trace His hand, you can still trust His heart. That is the quiet evolution of faith. Faith that has learned to breathe no longer demands signs. It listens. It no longer panics when the way is hidden. It rests, knowing that God sees further than you ever could. It does not measure His goodness by what He gives, but by who He is. And the more you learn this kind of faith, the more you discover that even waiting can be holy. Even weakness can be worship. It takes time to reach this stillness. The world teaches you to strive, to rush, to control. But God teaches faith through waiting. Waiting that feels endless, yet secretly builds endurance. It is written in Isaiah 40:31, "But those who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles." Waiting is not wasting. It is breathing room for the soul. C.S.LEWIS once said, "Relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done." Letters to Malcolm. Faith is not a one-time event. It is a daily surrender. Some mornings you wake with confidence. Other mornings you wake with doubt. But even then, the act of turning your face toward heaven, of whispering, "I trust you," still is enough. That is faith breathing. Perhaps you have found yourself in that quiet tension between hope and despair. You want to believe, but you are tired. You long for assurance, but all you have is a fragile kind of endurance. Do not despise that small faith. God never measures by size. He listens to the faintest heartbeat of trust and calls it enough. Even a mustard seed moves mountains, not because of its strength, but because of His. When you look back someday, you will see that your strongest moments were not the ones when everything was clear, but when you kept walking even through the fog. You will realize that faith was never about feeling unshakable. It was about choosing to stay even when you could have walked away. To have faith that breathes is to live slowly enough to feel God in the pauses, in the waiting between questions, in the sigh after prayer, in the breath that reminds you you're still here, still loved, still held. Faith does not erase fear. It teaches you to carry it with grace. It teaches you to breathe through the unknown, to rest even while the waves rise. So when you find yourself doubting, do not shame yourself for it. Doubt is often the doorway through which real faith enters. Breathe deeply. Whisper your uncertainty into the silence and let it become a prayer. God is not threatened by your doubt. He uses it to draw you nearer. Faith is not the absence of questions. It is the decision to remain with Him while you ask them. Let your faith breathe tonight. Do not rush it. Do not measure it. Do not fear its fragility. It is enough. You are enough. The same God who began this work within you is still at it, refining, reshaping, renewing. And even now, while you wait, something within you is growing strong and still. For this is what faith truly is. Not certainty, not perfection, but the quiet pulse of trust beneath the noise. It is the steady rhythm that whispers, even in darkness, I am still yours. And in that breath, soft, trembling, unbroken, God leans close and answers, and I am still here. There comes a time in the quiet journey of the soul when obedience no longer feels like duty, but like breathing. It is not forced, not commanded, not measured in fear. It simply becomes the natural movement of love, the way a flower turns toward light without effort. This is what happens when the heart begins to yield, when faith deepens into surrender, when you stop striving to understand God and simply allow Him to lead. At the beginning, obedience can feel like resistance. The human heart, shaped by its own desires and expectations, does not easily let go of control. We like to choose our pace, our plans, our outcomes. Yet God, in His gentle wisdom, invites us not to control, but to trust. He calls us not into the safety of our own certainty, but into the freedom of His will. And over time, as His presence grows familiar, the fear of surrender gives way to the beauty of willingness. When the heart softens, obedience stops being a test and becomes an answer. It is the quiet yes that rises before words, the instinct to love what He loves and follow where He leads. This willingness is not born of strength, but of nearness. The closer you draw to God, the more your will begins to breathe in rhythm with His. You no longer obey to earn love. You obey because you are loved. Jesus Himself showed us what such surrender looks like. In Gethsemane, He prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. That single sentence holds the weight of divine trust. Not passive, not weak, but profoundly strong. It is the moment when human will meets divine purpose and harmony is born. We are invited into the same stillness, to find peace not in getting our way, but in knowing that His way is good. C.S.LEWIS once wrote, "There are two kinds of people, those who say to God, 'Thy will be done,' and those to whom God says, in the end, 'Thy will be done.'" The Great Divorce. To choose the first is to live freely. It is to release the exhausting need to steer every moment and rest in the assurance that the one who made you knows where you are going. Obedience, in this sense, is not a rule to follow, but a song to remember. It hums through the soul of the one who has learned to trust, the one who has seen too much grace to doubt its source. When your heart becomes willing, even your silence becomes worship. Every simple act, the patience to wait, the kindness given in fatigue, the forgiveness offered in pain, becomes part of the melody. Sometimes God will ask small things of you, to speak a gentle word, to walk away from bitterness, to forgive what was never apologized for. These may not seem grand, but they are sacred. Each act of quiet obedience opens space for grace to move. Each choice to trust becomes a door through which light enters. You may never see the full reach of these choices, but heaven does. There will also be times when obedience feels costly, when God's leading takes you down a path that seems uncertain, when His call asks you to release something you love. These are the moments when the willing heart is tested. It trembles, but it still says yes. And in that trembling, you discover that obedience is not about losing, but about being reshaped for greater love. The willing heart is not without fear,
but it chooses trust over fear. It is not perfect, but it is open. It listens before it decides. It kneels before it moves. It learns that surrender is not an end to freedom, but the beginning of it. For only when you release your need to control the story can God write it fully.
When your heart grows willing, even the smallest moments of your life become sacred ground. You begin to see that the ordinary, a conversation, a prayer, a breath, can be holy when offered with openness. You start to notice that obedience has its own quiet joy, a joy not of achievement, but of alignment, of feeling your steps fall in time with something eternal.
There is a peace that comes when you no longer wrestle against God's will. It does not mean that you no longer question or feel, but that you no longer resist. You learn to trust the direction of His hand, even when it leads you through shadows. You begin to understand that the journey is not about getting everything right, but about staying close enough to hear His voice. C.S.LEWIS once wrote in Perelandra, "A creature revolting against a creator is revolting against the source of his own powers, including even his power to revolt." When you stop resisting and begin to yield, your strength is no longer spent on fighting God's purpose. It becomes a current through which His love can flow. That is the true strength of the willing heart. It allows grace to move unhindered.
Perhaps obedience once felt heavy to you, a word tied to rules, expectations, or fear. But when love matures, it transforms obedience into something weightless. It becomes the quiet joy of cooperation, the peace of walking in rhythm with the divine will. It is the relief of finally laying down your burden of self-direction and trusting that you are being led somewhere good. So tonight, if you feel a nudge to let go, to forgive, to begin, to believe, listen. You do not need to understand the whole picture. You only need to be willing. That small, sincere yes is enough. It is through such small yeses that God reshapes the soul and rewrites the story.
Let your heart be willing, even if your courage feels small. The willingness itself is faith. It is the bridge between who you are and who you are becoming. When you whisper, "Thy will be done," heaven hears it as music, and something within you begins to rest.
For in the end, obedience is not about surrendering control. It is about returning home. And as your heart grows still in that sacred yielding, you will find that the truest freedom was never found in doing as you please, but in loving enough to trust. There comes a moment, often after the long night, after the questions have softened and the heart has grown quiet, when God begins to send signs that you were never walking alone. They do not shout. They do not announce themselves with brilliance. They come softly, like the flicker of a candle in a still room, or like the whisper of your name in the dark. These are the confirmations, tender assurances that the path you have walked, with all its turns and silences, has been guided all along. Sometimes it begins with something small, a verse you happen to read at the exact moment your heart needed it, a word from a friend that answers a prayer you never spoke aloud, a song that plays at the right time, saying what you could not say. You pause for a moment, wondering if it's coincidence, and then you realize it feels too exact, too gentle, too kind to be random. That is how God speaks, not in thunder, but in alignment, not through pressure, but through peace. When your life begins to shift, when the lessons of waiting and trusting have done their quiet work, God begins to reveal His fingerprints, delicate, unmistakable, and kind. He shows you that every unanswered prayer had purpose, that every delay carried preparation, that every closed door led you to a better one. You begin to see it all, not with the eyes of fear, but with the eyes of understanding.
C.S.LEWIS once wrote, "We can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains." The problem of pain. In the same way, His confirmations often come not to announce something new, but to remind you that He has been speaking all along. And now, finally, your heart is still enough to hear.
The story of Gideon is one of the most tender portraits of divine confirmation. When God called him to lead the Israelites, Gideon was afraid. He doubted his strength, his worth,
even his hearing. So he asked for a sign, a fleece wet with dew while the ground remained dry, and then again the fleece dry while the ground was wet. Twice God answered, not because he had to, but because he understood Gideon's heart. That is how gentle God is with our uncertainty. He meets us where we are, even in our doubt, and assures us with kindness rather than rebuke. Perhaps you too have asked for such a sign, not out of disbelief, but out of need. Perhaps you whispered, Lord, if this is you, show me. And somehow, through a quiet confirmation, a phrase, a moment, a peace that passes understanding, you knew. It wasn't explanation you received, it was recognition, a deep knowing that cannot be reasoned, only felt. That is how God's confirmations often come, not to the mind, but to the spirit. You begin to see how his presence laces through your ordinary days, in the timing of an encounter, in the way a door opens just as another closes, in the inexplicable peace that fills a room where you once felt afraid. He has been arranging your life like a melody, every pause and note intentional, every silence filled with meaning. At first, you may hesitate to believe it. You might say, surely this is just chance. But over time, as these gentle signs accumulate, as the peace deepens each time you follow his prompting, you realize there is nothing random about grace. What you once called coincidence, you now recognize as the quiet precision of love. Sometimes the confirmation comes through stillness. When you ask for an answer and the only response is peace, that too is a yes. Other times it comes through movement, when everything suddenly aligns and what once felt impossible becomes effortless. That too is a yes. And sometimes it comes through waiting, a long silence that tests your faith, but in the end strengthens it beyond what you imagined. That too is an answer, though not in words. God's confirmations are rarely loud because his love does not need to prove itself. He speaks softly because he knows you will recognize his voice. As Jesus said in John 10:27, "My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." His voice may come through scripture, through dreams, through the quiet intuition that stirs like a heartbeat within you. However it comes, it always carries peace. Confusion is not his language. And when you finally begin to see it, how every season connected, how every loss made room for blessing, how every question led to trust, gratitude fills the spaces where fear once lived. You begin to walk differently, speak differently, rest differently. You no longer demand signs. You notice them. You no longer chase certainty. You walk in confidence born of quiet faith. C.S.LEWIS once reflected, "When I lay these questions before God, I get no answer, but a rather special sort of no answer. It is not the locked door. It is more like a silent, compassionate gaze, as though he shook his head not in refusal, but in waving back my question. Like, 'Peace, child, you don't understand now.' A grief observed." That is what divine confirmation feels like. Not always information, but presence. Not explanation, but peace. As your journey unfolds, you will continue to receive these subtle affirmations, moments when you know, without logic or proof, that you are exactly where you are meant to be. They may come less as signs and more as harmony, your steps matching the rhythm of grace. You will stop asking, "Is God here?" and start realizing he never left. And when the night grows quiet, when all the lessons of restlessness, surrender, and faith settle into stillness, you will see the full pattern. The restlessness that began it, the closed doors that guided you, the people who appeared at the right moment, the peace that held you, the opportunities that shaped you, the restoration that healed you, the faith that steadied you, the obedience that freed you. All of it was one long conversation between you and God. And now, in this quiet hour, as you rest beneath the weight of that truth, perhaps you hear him whisper once more, not in command, not in warning, but in love. "You have done well to trust me. Rest now. You are where you are meant to be." The night deepens, the world softens, and your heart, once restless, now still, knows what it has been learning all along. The signs were always there. The path was always holy. And as you drift toward sleep, The last thing you feel is peace, gentle and whole, as if God Himself has breathed it into your chest.
Then, softly, the story closes, and all that remains is quiet. You are home.